The United States didn't just appear. It was forged, literally forged in fire, through one conflict after another. So today, we're going to take a look at those key moments, from the very first clashes to the war that almost ripped the whole country in two. I mean, that one line, it's everything, right? It's the whole promise of America in a nutshell. But here's the thing. From day one, figuring out what equality for all actually means, well, that's been the central fight of the entire American story. So the road to that ideal, it wasn't exactly paved with good intentions. The reality is, America wasn't born in some peaceful meeting of the minds. It was hammered into shape through some pretty brutal, world-changing conflicts. And it all kicked off with this incredible collision of two completely different worlds. All right, first up, a collision of worlds. And let's be clear, this story doesn't start with an empty continent just waiting to be discovered. It starts with a violent clash, the moment European ambitions slammed right into a land that was already home to millions of people. So, long before Columbus ever set sail in 1492, this place was anything but an empty wilderness. I'm talking about hundreds of sophisticated societies, each with their own governments, their own vast trade routes. I mean, these were cultures that had been thriving for thousands of years. And for the Europeans trying to set up shop, it was tough. I mean, really tough. Sure, the Spanish got St. Augustine going in 1565, but the English, they failed spectacularly at Roanoke. The famous lost colony. Jamestown was a total nightmare of disease and starvation, barely hanging on. And even the Pilgrims at Plymouth, they had a just brutal first winter before they could get established. Okay, so as these little colonial outposts started to grow, something interesting happened. A whole new identity started to take shape, an American identity. And that new identity, it was about to put them on a direct collision course with the biggest empire on the planet. Which brings us to the big question, right? How does a bunch of colonies, loyal subjects of the king, suddenly decide to defy a global superpower? What does it take to turn them into revolutionaries, willing to risk absolutely everything? Well, it basically became this vicious cycle. See, Britain was broke after a big war, so they started slapping taxes on the colonies. The colonists felt totally betrayed, taxation without representation, so they protested. And what did Britain do? They cracked down even harder. And that just poured gasoline on the fire, pushing everyone closer and closer to a total break. And then came the spark, the final breaking point, on a little village green in Lexington, Massachusetts in 1775. To this day, nobody really knows who fired first, but it doesn't matter. That one gunshot, the shot heard round the world, kicked off the entire Revolutionary War. So how on earth did this band of rebels actually win? It's incredible when you think about it. First, you've got George Washington, who somehow molds this ragtag group of farmers into a real army. Then, the absolute game changer, the victory at Saratoga in 77. That convinced France to jump in on America's side. And finally, in 1781, with the French Navy blocking the escape route, they trapped the main British army at Yorktown. Game over. The Treaty of Paris in 83 made it official. The United States was its own country. Okay, so winning the war was the hard part, right? Wrong. Now they had to actually build a country from scratch. And that, my friends, was a whole different kind of war. This one was fought with ideas, not guns. And let me tell you, their first try was a total dud. It was called the Articles of Confederation, and it was a mess. They were so scared of creating another powerful king that they made the central government ridiculously weak. Like, it couldn't even collect taxes to pay for the war they just fought. So after seeing things like Shays' Rebellion pop up, they knew they had to scrap it and start over. That's where the Constitution comes in, a brand new plan for government that was actually strong enough to work. Now, getting this thing passed was a huge fight. You had the Federalists who wanted that strong central government, and the Anti-Federalists who were terrified it would become a tyranny. They argued, they debated, and they finally compromised on a two-house Congress, a president, a Supreme Court. It was ratified in 1788. But, and this is a huge but, to get everyone to agree, they made a fatal decision. They basically punted on the issue of slavery. They just left it unresolved, planting a ticking time bomb right at the foundation of the new nation. And that time bomb, well, it just sat there, ticking away for decades, festering, growing, until it finally, inevitably, blew up, threatening to tear the entire country apart. So can you really have a country that's half slave and half free? Can that actually survive? That became the question of the 19th century. And every time the US expanded westward, every time a new state was added, it just threw that fragile balance into chaos, making a massive showdown feel more and more inevitable. And then came the year 1860, the final straw, the election of Abraham Lincoln. Now, he actually said he wouldn't touch slavery in the states where it already was, but it didn't matter. Just the fact that his platform was anti-slavery, the South saw that as a direct threat to their entire economy, their entire way of life. And the fallout was fast and furious. In December of 1860, South Carolina was out. By February 61, 6 more states had joined them to form the Confederacy. And then in April, Confederate forces opened fire on Fort Sumter. That was it. The Civil War had begun. So you had these two sides, right? The Union in the North had all the factories, a bigger population, and an established military. Their goal was simple: keep the country together. The Confederacy in the South was mostly agricultural, but they had some brilliant generals. Their goal? Win independence so they could protect the institution of slavery. It's really that straightforward. It was an absolutely brutal war, but after a few years, you start to see these key turning points. First, in 1863, Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation. This changes everything. It's not just about preserving the Union anymore, it's a fight for freedom. Then you get the massive Union victories at Gettysburg and Vicksburg, also in 63. That was a huge blow to the Confederacy. A year later, Sherman's march to the sea just devastates the South's ability to wage war. And that all leads to April 1865, when General Lee finally surrenders at Appomattox. So the war is over. The nation is saved. But the fighting was far from finished. Now, America had 2 enormous challenges on its hands. How do you rebuild the completely shattered South? And, at the same time, how do you continue this relentless expansion out west? And that push west was fueled by this really powerful idea called manifest destiny. It was basically the belief that the United States was destined, like by God, to stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific. It was this idea that was used to justify everything that happened as the country expanded. So you have this incredible contradiction happening. In the East, you have Reconstruction. The government is trying to rebuild the South and pass these huge new amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th, to abolish slavery and grant citizenship and voting rights to 4 million newly freed African Americans. But at the exact same time, the Transcontinental Railroad is completed in 1869, and it just unleashes this massive wave of settlers out west, leading to more and more intense and violent conflicts with Native American tribes. But that whole promise of Reconstruction, it didn't last. In 1877, a backroom political deal known as the Compromise of 1877 formally ended it. Federal troops were pulled out of the South, and with them went any real protection for African Americans. It was an abrupt and devastating end to the era. So there you have it, a nation forged through a century of non-stop conflict. The United States was whole again, at least on a map. But what did it really mean to be united? The truth is, all those conflicts left behind some deep, deep scars and a ton of unanswered questions. And the struggle to figure out what that word, united, truly means, well, that was just getting started.